Okay, we're back in session, and thank you for the patience you all showed as our executive session went on for quite some time, and we will report on the action of that session in the public agenda item coming up. The first thing I wanted to do as part of my president's report is just to welcome Kim Perigo to our board, a brand new member. Mesa College Academic Senate President representing the faculty, and we look forward to working with her. Since our executive session went so long, I'm going to cut my 20-minute speech back to 10 minutes. I hope that's okay. As you can see, we have a full agenda. We're racing against very significant legislative deadlines that Member Costa helped us be held to. And you'll hear from the CEO that there's an awful lot going on, and we're, as I like to say, we're dancing as fast as we can to get as much done in the time that we're allotted. So I just wanted to say also, when we have the policy discussion at the end of this, it's a very lengthy document. This is a work in progress, and we welcome input, and we really look forward to public input as we shape these policies going forward. With that, I'll turn it over to CEO.
Thank you, President Epstein. We are, as the President said, very busy and very active these days. We are working on, and I will point out as we get through the agenda and we're on to items, but as much as possible, we are trying to find ways in which we can invite public input into our processes. We are working on finalizing policies for the running of our district and our college, and we have put on a link onto our website so that we can attract input. It's been very exciting for us in many different parts of our startup experience to be able to hear from the community. Certainly in naming our college, and we have a vote coming up for that as well, we have been able to vet and hear from the public about their preferences for the name for our college. And as much as possible, whether it be by putting out lots of RFPs and making those available on Planet Bids, we're going to try to invite input as much as possible. We are starting to work with various unions now in building training programs that we know will work well for their members, and we're getting input and starting to collaborate with folks. So it's getting very exciting, and I really am grateful to all of the trustees and to the public for all of your help and support and belief in our mission.
Great. Okay, first up is the consent calendar. We have the meeting minutes from the last Board of Trustees meeting in March, and we also have the rescheduling of the June Executive Committee meeting. Is there any discussion about those? Any public comment? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve.
Second.
That's Rawlings and Haynes. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
We need to do.
Oh, I'm sorry, the roll call. All right, sorry.
It would be more efficient, less fun.
Okay, Ms. Gutierrez?
Alexander Walker Griffin.
Aye.
Amy Costa.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Blas Villalobos.
Aye.
Darius Anderson.
Aye.
Hildegard Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Jennifer Perry.
Yes.
Jolena Grande.
Aye.
Kevin Hall.
Here.
Pamela Haynes.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Valerie Shaw. Kim Perigo.
I didn't get a chance to vote.
Oh, you didn't call him Trustee Baum.
Oh, because he wasn't here before.
Yeah.
But she took the roll.
Jeffrey Baum.
Yes.
And, okay, you need to make sure to go through the whole board every time. Thank you. Okay, the consent calendar is approved. The next item is the action item, public vote on candidates for certain executive and administrative positions. I will just begin by saying that we chose to just put forward one position. and we're going to continue. There's still some work to be done on the others, and so we're just going to move forward with one, but I'll turn it over to the CEO just to present the action we plan to take.
And then we're also going to have a vote. Okay, you're speaking to the
The executive.
okay.
Yeah.
Executive session. Okay. I'm sorry. So yes, in closed session, that's what you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just.
In closed session and in executive session, we spoke and discussed the candidacy of. We spoke about 4 different people for different positions. However, in today's meeting, we're actually only going to be voting on one position, and that is a special assistant to work directly for and with me. And that person will be handling confidential data as well as administering my schedule, my activities, et cetera. And I think we had a robust conversation. Are we supposed to invite public
Yes.
comment?
Yeah. So
Right.
first of all, why don't you say what the name is and.
I'm sorry, Michael Peterson, who's actually present with us today, has an illustrious career and lots of years of experience in being private confidential assistant to many executives, and we've put forward his candidacy.
Okay.
Move approval of his contract as suggested by the CEO.
Motion by Baum, second by Shaw. And yeah, I know. Is there any? First of all, is there any board comment on this? Any public comment? Okay. With that, please call the roll.
Hildegard Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Darius Anderson. Jeffrey Baum.
Aye.
Amy Costa.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Jolena Grande.
Aye.
Pamela Haynes.
Aye.
Kevin Hall. Kim Perigo.
Aye.
Jennifer Perry. Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Valerie Shaw. Blas Villalobos. Alexander Walker Griffin.
Aye.
Alexis Zaragoza. Oh, sorry.
So I do want to report for the record that we were happy with our decision to hire Michael Peterson. And under California law, as board president, I'm obligated to orally announce all of the monetary provisions of the contract and the values of the same. Once I announce the monetary benefits employment agreement, this employment agreement and the associated values, actually the board was supposed to vote after I did this. So I think we're going to have to take another vote now that I am reading into the record the terms of the contract. I apologize for that. So the agreement provides for a base salary of $105,000. It includes membership in CalPERS and related employer contribution as set by statute, and health benefits is currently offered to other classified employees. So that last vote did not count, but this one does. I think we probably need to do the motion and second again, too.
I just wanted to point out that this is the first classified employee and the first confidential employee of the online college, so the support staff is starting to get built out, and it's very happy to see that.
And
I second.
okay. Well, please call the roll.
Alexander Walker Griffin.
Aye.
Amy Costa.
Aye.
Bill Rawlings.
Aye.
Blas Villalobos. Darius Anderson. Jeffrey Baum.
Aye.
Hildegard Aguinaldo.
Aye.
Jennifer Perry. Jolena Grande.
Aye.
Kevin Hall. Pamela Haynes.
Aye.
Tom Epstein.
Aye.
Valerie Shaw. Kim Perigo.
Aye.
Okay, thanks. Motion is adopted. We'll go to item 3.2, the consideration of a new name for the California Online College District. As just emotional we are about the COCCD, I think we'll probably be prepared for something new. CEO.
Yes, I'm sorry if anyone was attached to the online California Community College district name. However, we have been working with a wonderful firm led by a man by the name of Steve Barretto, who has done a fantastic job of working with numerous Californians to help us not only surface some really viable names for our college, but also to then go back and test with over 1,000 folks just to get feedback around which of the names that we were considering were most favored. Or which name was most favored. If you all recall from last time, Calterra, Embarcadero, and Calbright were all in the running. Long story short, by a very wide margin, people really overwhelmingly prefer Calbright College. And so I'm here to ask you all for your enthusiasm and support for naming our college or doing business from a legal perspective as Calbright College.
Any board comment? Any public comment? Okay, I just want to say this is a kind of a feel-good moment. It shows real progress. We'll actually have something that kind of works on the web and in the outside world, and I'm excited about it. You move? Is that a motion?
Yes, I'll move it and then say. Having had an opportunity, and I'm hoping that my colleagues did too, to see sort of the logos and the colors and the backgrounds that were in the running. It's quite. I know it's. I think it's quite exciting to be building a new college and sort of having most of us come into organizations that are already in existence, and therefore we don't have a lot of say in sort of the development of all of this. And so I happen to like Calbright, so I'm really glad that choice is made anyway. So I move the item.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
There is no capital B. There is no hyphenation in there. It's just Calbright, CALBRIGHT. And I will also say we have a big event where we'll do a formal unveiling on June 22nd. We hope that you all can attend, where we'll be able to do a big unveiling with the full mark and the look, and we'll have some swag available and all that.
Okay, please call the roll.
Hildegard Aguinaldo,
Aye.
Darius Anderson, Jeffrey Baum,
Aye.
Amy Costa,
Aye.
Tom Epstein,
Aye.
Jolena Grande,
Aye.
Pamela Haynes,
Aye.
Kevin Hall, Kim Perigo, Jennifer Perry, Bill Rawlings,
Aye.
Valerie Shaw, Blas Villalobos, Alexander Walker Griffin,
Aye.
Okay, passed unanimously. We have a name. We are now the Board of Trustees of Calbright College. All right. that
Congratulations,
deserves a
everybody.
round of applause. Okay, next item, 3.3, the tentative budget. And we're going to have a presentation by, I'll turn it over to the CEO first to make the introduction.
Thank you. I want to start by saying Julian Roberts has done a phenomenal job in working with us with, again, very little information, and this is not something he's ever trained for before, which is to start building a budget for us from scratch and for a brand new college and district, and you've done a tremendous job, so thank you for that, Julian. I will give some context, and then I want to invite you all to ask any of the questions that you have for our tentative budget. It is tentative, that's what you are voting on today, and a final budget will be presented for approval on September 15th. This budget captures the first full year of activity after I am since I've been appointed, and starts. It is in place now. I want to remind you all that you'll see two different buckets of money that we are talking to and speaking to in terms of our plans. One is the one-time amount of the $100 million, which are funds which are intended to give us a one-time ability to invest in setting up this college and district. And so although this is not a limited list of what the money could go to, but these are mostly what the funds are intended for. Technology infrastructure, research and development, development of partnerships, the creation of core functions, a 7-year business plan, accreditation, and other business processes. In contrast, our $20 million of ongoing funds are allocated for, but not limited to, licensing software, professional development and training, assessment of program pathways, ongoing costs, and other administrative functions of the college. Our approach for funding is zero-based, since the online is in a nascent stage of development. We're assuming personnel expenses begin in Q1 of the year, and for conservative and sustainable approaches to salaries moving forward, because those are obviously cumulative and stay with us once they're in place. We've assumed an annual funding levels of $20 million per year, and we are prioritizing or have prioritized ongoing expenses to be covered by the annual ongoing funds to ensure financial sustainability long term. The primary inputs of our budget include the total budget is for $48.3 million. 17.5 million of that is related to personnel and benefits. Operating expenses are 8.8 million of the budget. Capital outlay is a total of 22 million and includes both technology as well as physical infrastructure development. And over the course of the next year, we estimate that we will hire about 95 people across 8 programmatic and administrative divisions. We won't take a deep dive into this today unless there are questions related to this, but as you all are knowing, and you will see soon in our 7-year implementation plan, that a lot of our strategies that we are financing at this point include what we call a minimal viable product for our first 3 training programs to go live October 1 in 3 different programmatic areas, that we are going to be testing and piloting a lot of different technologies to learn what works and what's missing for us. We are also going to be spending and investing money to build the awareness about our value proposition, which is very unique in the marketplace, both in the education marketplace as well as in the talent acquisition space. So we need to build awareness about our value proposition, both in the community of learners, as well as in the community of employers and other stakeholders like our union partners. We need to invest in forging partnerships with community colleges, with other community colleges, with employers, with unions, with community-based organizations, and other stakeholders. We also need to invest in research and development so that we learn what works for whom and what doesn't, and so that other communities, other states can also scale and learn from and do what we're implementing that works for our folks. And that we're able to staff critical positions and stand up an infrastructure that we believe will be robust enough to serve at least 8 million underemployed Californians. Julian, why don't I invite you to talk us through the next slides of the budget?
Sure. Yep. Okay, so this is the draft fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. And the format that you see on the left-hand side is typical of a community college budget. and financial statement. So would it be helpful if I just went through all the detail from top to bottom? Okay. So you'll see that the budget is split into two columns, the annual fund and the one-time fund. And then as we go from top to bottom, we have the projected roll forward balance, the different revenue sources, the expenses, and then ultimately the ending balance for the fiscal year. The top line there is projected roll forward balance, and what that means is what we estimate funds to be the beginning balance of both of those funds for the beginning of the fiscal year. And so what that $17 million on the projected roll forward balance assumes that we'll have spent $3 million from the annual ongoing fund by the end of the current fiscal year, and that will be the balance that we have to use in the next fiscal year. Questions? I'll keep going, or I'll keep going. All right. So the next section, we have the revenue. We have other general apportionments, which is the $20 million ongoing annual fund. And then we have the other general categorical program revenue. So what we're doing there is you'll see that the $13.7 million that has been recognized under the one-time fund equals the total expenses in the total expenses for the one-time fund. So it's 13.7 to 13.7. And what's happening there is based on GASB Statement 33, we are recognizing that revenue as we incur expenses for the purpose of that fund. All right, so what we will do is going forward, we'll look at the projected roll forward balance and ending balance each quarter so that you know what funds are available in that particular fund, even if we haven't recognized it as revenue. Is that helpful, clear? Questions? Yes, please.
I'm recognizing the total revenue in the one-time fund column as 13,698, and then I see it again as total expenses 13,698, which would balance it out. But then why does it appear to be subtracted from the 100 million as we get to the ending balance?
Good question. So what that means is we are using $13.7 million of one-time funds, and then at the end of the fiscal year, we'll have $86.3 million available. So what you're seeing is a mix between balance sheet items and income statement items. So the 13.7 you'll see on an income statement, so the revenue and expense will balance out. And then when you see the balance sheet, the audited financials, you'll see in the deferred revenue balance, 86.3 million. Is that helpful?
I'm just trying to figure if they're balancing out why they would also subtract from the 100 million. I understand the deferred revenue concept as a liability, but I'm just wondering why it appears that they would balance out to zero out and then still be subtracted.
So it's a good question. It's an interesting question because these types of financial statements are what's called semi-accrual, and so you have a little bit of that mix between accrual and cash basis in some ways. And here you're looking at that ending balance is not necessarily an income statement item. It's a balance sheet item that you're seeing flow through, which makes recognizing revenue on deferred a little bit more complicated when you're looking at this. Any other questions on that piece?
If no, Jeff.
When do we, and maybe this would be for the end, when do we anticipate revenues beyond the initial 100 million allocation?
So I think there are several sources. So in the statute that authorizes the online college, it's discussed that the online college will generate apportionments, and that's based on FTES, and so we'll have to go into conversations both with our auditors as well as the Chancellor's office on how that's accomplished. I think when it comes to other types of revenue sources, I think President Hiles would be better equipped to answer that particular question. So we've been discussing other revenue sources besides the annual and the one-time. And so,
Yes.
there's the employer fees and
Yes.
so on.
And we could
Yeah.
do that when we do the business, I know a business plan is in
Exactly.
development as
But
well.
I was just, for the high level answer, we are working on a financial model that will allow us to be self-sustaining. And so we can talk about that in the future in our plans.
Okay, I'm afraid, I hate to do this, but I have a question. On the annual fund side of the ledger
Yep.
there, you have a projected roll forward balance of 17 million. Is that from fiscal year 18-19?
Yes.
And then you've got the 20 million for 19-20.
Yep.
So presumably that means we have 37 million.
Yes.
Okay, and then you have these expenses, which add up to 19 million.
Yep.
So that leaves 18 roughly, or that's 20, I guess. So 37 minus 20, 17, and then you're transferring almost 15 to capital outlay. And
Yes.
and what does that mean? What does the capital outlay line item mean under the annual fund budget? What is that being spent on?
So it's being spent on three spaces. I think it's the detail is in.
Oh, so you're
Slide
coming. Oh,
7.
you've got it in a future slide. Okay, forget
Yeah,
it. Then
yeah.
we'll wait to another slide.
But essentially, we're just transferring those funds out for
Okay.
physical infrastructure build out.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll go into expenses. All right, so expenses, we have several large buckets, and what you're seeing here with the codes is with the language and then the codes, what we're trying to do is link what we're doing, which I believe is a new project, and then mapping it over into what exists in terms of the compliance framework. So you're seeing a little bit of the old and new here. So you have two different types of personnel. You have learner-oriented personnel, which is in the Budget and Accounting Manual, Object Code 1000. You have support-oriented personnel, which is Object Code 2000. For the learner-oriented personnel, it's 7.5 million. For support-oriented, it's 5 million. And then benefits, we have estimated at 40%. So we did a benchmark analysis of 12 different colleges, and those rates range from 33 to 57%. At this point, we have to go into negotiations and find a broker and do that deeper analysis. But I think for the time being, for the tentative budget, I think 40% is sufficient. Any questions there? No? Okay, all right.
Oh, no, sorry.
I want to make one comment. I think you have it on your personnel detail slide.
Yeah.
Is that coming up next?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we have operating expenses at 2.3 million in the annual fund. On the one-time side, we have 6.4, and then the tech capital outlay, Object Code 6000. It's all in the one-time fund at $7.2 million. I recall Trustee Rawlings' comments about when we discussed our contingency reserve policy last time. So we discussed 5%, and you requested that we try to get that a little higher. So it's a shout out to you there. All right, so personnel assumptions. Again, echoing President Heil's comments around taking a conservative approach to budgeting salaries. We assumed that these people would be hired in Q1. Again, the benefits rate is 40%. Personnel statistics, our personnel expense is 88% of total operating budget across around 95 positions for these, for the learner-focused areas, employer-focused areas, employer and labor-focused areas, and administrative support. So next slide. Operating expenses. So some of the key drivers of the operating expense on the annual side are the Oakland, Sacramento leasing space, the ERP and tech licensing and support, and then incidentals, training, travel, conferences, convenings at $500,000. On the one-time side, so you see we have operating expenses that are flowing across the two different funds, and so they match two different purposes, as President Hiles was discussing. Developing and testing student support model at $3 million. Again, this is an estimate. Building awareness and research campaigns at $1 million. Legal support and foundation support at $1 million each for the fiscal year. On the capital outlay side, We have the 3 sites, Oakland, which is HQ, and it's also a production site, Sacramento, and then Southern California at those amounts there that you see in the slide. And then the one-time capital outlay drivers on the one-time side are for $5 million for the Ed and Tech Value Chain RFP, which President Hiles is going to speak to in a couple agenda items later, and then 1.3 for ERP implementation. So, questions?
Any
That's the end
questions
of the
from the
presentation.
board? If Member Costa doesn't have any questions, we're in good shape. Member Rawlings.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out on the learner expenses side that
Yes.
that's 54%
Yes.
of the budget. So we're meeting the 50% requirement on there. The other thing I would point out is that this first budget is fairly important, particularly because we're building in a structure on where we're allocating our resources, so that as we have more employees come on board, it's going to end up kind of tightening up how we're spending our money. And so what we do this time is really going to be setting a pattern for the future. So especially regarding the 50% law, I'm glad we're doing that. I'm hoping that we're making sure we get closer to the 75-25 provisions, because the play between those two, especially once you begin introducing collective bargaining, that collective bargaining agreements, they will really lock this budget into place at some point when we get there.
Yes, please.
Okay, any other comments from the board? Trustee Zaragoza?
I was just wondering, so for the capital outlay assumptions
Yeah.
for the 3 sites,
Yeah.
I was just curious if deciding between the Southern California and the Central Valley would change that amount, or
I think it would,
Okay.
but it's hard to say exactly
yeah.
what at this
Do we
point.
know when that decision is going to be made?
So you'll be brought in on that decision-making process. We
Okay.
have just released an RFP for a real estate broker that can help us get more detail on those decisions.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments from the board? Any public comments? And I think you all know in the audience, if you have a public comment, you should bring it to Ms. Gutierrez over here, and she'll fill out a form and bring it up. This is one thing I would say. I'm not sure if this presentation was posted online with the agenda. So those of you who want a copy of it, we will definitely have it posted, and you can take a look at it at your leisure as well. With that, I'm sorry, Trustee Perry.
I just want to commend Julian. He's wearing 2 hats, and both of them are pretty big. So I want to commend him for doing this. I have the pleasure of serving on the foundation board, too, and I see his good work there. And it's translating very well to this job. So thank you. I know it can't have been easy, but...
I have to commend my wife, Rebecca Schubert. There's a lot of patience with me.
Yeah, and there's one other thing I would say. I mean, we are operating on the traditional fiscal year of July 1 to June 30th. Traditionally, community colleges do not adopt a final budget until after the state may revise and the vote of the legislature and the signature of the governor. So, as I understand it, most community college districts wait until September to adopt a final budget. We're going to try and do it in July at our next meeting to adopt the final budget, because I prefer to have a final budget just a few weeks into the new budget year rather than a few months. So, so I commend the board or the staff to get that done, and that would be great. Member Costa.
So just on that point, I do want to say I raised it when we had our operating procedures about when we would enact our budget, and I agree with the direction you're going that it should be in July, and I'm wondering if we should look at our operating procedures and align it accordingly.
Okay, does the procedure say September? Is that
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's something
the
to note.
procedure says by September. So,
By September. Oh.
so we can
Still,
cer-
the
yeah.
point is
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I think that we should more, or earlier in the fiscal year, we should have our final budget if our board meetings align in that way.
Okay. Great. Okay, with that, I think we can call the roll on approval of a tentative budget for the 2019-20 fiscal year.
So moved.
So, yes. Oh, So the motion was made by Costa and seconded by Villalobos. Okay, please call the roll.
Hildegard Aguinaldo,
Aye.
Darius Anderson, Jeffrey Baum,
Aye.
Amy Costa,
Aye.
Tom Epstein,
Aye.
Jolena Grande,
Aye.
Pamela Haynes,
Aye.
Kevin Hall, Kim Perigo, Jennifer Perry, Bill Rawlings,
Aye.
Valerie Shaw, Blas Villalobos, Alexander Walker Griffin,
Yes.
Okay, the motion is approved. Moving on to the next item, item 2.4, another action item, the selection of an auditor, approval of the auditor contract. I believe Julian is continuing on this
Yeah,
one.
sure.
Unless you
So,
want to say anything.
Do you want to?
I just wanted to give context that we have been working under the counsel of a pre-existing auditing firm so that we are building systems in the way in which we can be audited well. And now we are in the process of selecting an official third-party auditor, which is completely objective and brand new to us, to do the official audit. So I just want to set that context.
Yes, great. So the online college, like any other community college, is subject to an annual audit, and so we to get to that end, we drafted a request for proposals, and we sent it to 6 different community college auditors within the community college space, and we also posted it on our website. We received 2 proposals, one from CLA, the other one from Harshwell and Company. We analyzed their proposals, evaluated their proposals, did in-person interviews, and then also checked references for each of those firms. And although Harshwell had an excellent proposal and good interviews and very solid references, their first audit, they had never audited a community college before. And given the context in which we are operating, I don't think that would be an appropriate type of first try for us. The other firm, which was CLA, they have their partner has decades of experience within the community college system. They have currently 6 clients, community college clients. Sometimes they can operate up to 12. When we did the interviews and reference check, the interviews, they displayed strong interest in partnering, and they saw the opportunity that they had with us to build an infrastructure. Their references came back. Some people said that they were at the top. Just very, very strong references when I spoke to controllers and financial professionals in the community college system. So the recommendation is that we select them as our auditor for this upcoming fiscal year, or for the current fiscal year.
Move approval of the recommendation.
Second.
Baum and Haynes. Any comment from board members or the public? Okay, please call the roll.
Hildegard Aguinaldo,
Aye.
Darius Anderson, Jeffrey Baum,
Yes.
Amy Costa,
Aye.
Tom Epstein,
Aye.
Jolena Grande,
Aye.
Pamela Haynes,
Aye.
Kevin Hall, Kim Perigo, Jennifer Perry, Bill Rawlings,
Aye.
Valerie Shaw, Blas Villalobos, Alexander Walker Griffin,
Aye.
That motion is approved. Okay, moving on to the next item, which is the first reading of draft board policies. This is a lengthy document that I suspect not everyone has had a chance to fully absorb, but we'll have a presentation on those policies by the CEO.
Yes, so we're, first of all, I want to invite both Roz and Derek to come on up in case there are particular questions. What you have before you is just the first reading. So we weren't planning on making a big presentation about this today because I've presumed you maybe haven't combed through all of the policies yet. However, these are 3 chapters of our board policies, including the general institution of our college and district, our policies regarding academic affairs, as well as learner services. And as you will recall, you have already approved chapters 1 and 2 and 6 and 7. But we wanted to make sure that you had enough time to go through these at your leisure in great detail. And we really appreciate the effort up front in advance. I also wanted to share, though, that we do have on our caonlinecollege.org website a link that says share your feedback, so that we want to invite members of the public to give us their input and feedback about the policies that we have drafted to date. But I wanted to see if I'd love to see if there are any specific questions, or if you'd like, President, we can go through a first cut of.
Well, I think it would be good to get a general overview. I don't know if Derek or any of the attorneys are the right people to go through, but just obviously not a section by section, but just in general, what issues are we addressing, and maybe if there are specific areas where you're looking for input, that would be helpful. And say your full name, by the way.
Right, and title, or what are you doing? Your acting position.
So I'm Derek Gordon. I'm the acting COO for the Online Community College, but also working with our faculty team as sort of an acting CLO while we're searching for a Chief Learning Officer.
I'm Rosalind Haley. I am the Accreditation Liaison Officer and a faculty member at the Online College, working on board policy and accreditation plans.
And I would say just generally, we have been guided by both the League of California Community Colleges and the sort of template that they set up for board policies, as well as a careful sort of reading and curation of what the other 114 have done with their board policies. We look through all of those, and we're guided by those, informed by those. Frankly, did a lot of copying and pasting, but even beyond that, then really made sure that we were also trying to adapt it so that it fit the competency-based education model that we're really focusing in on, which of course makes us a little different than the other 114. We've also been very mindful of the requirements we need to meet, both in terms of accreditation and in terms of the statutes and other policies. Roz is the world's greatest sort of police officer in that front, and has been guiding our efforts on that. So maybe I'll let you speak to that part.
I think probably the best summary of the legislated mandates that we have been held responsible or accountable for, as set forth in 7500 through 750012, are set forth in the board policy in such a way that we are designing, for the first time in the history of the California Community College system, a competency-based education program format on utilizing direct assessment in a no-term calendar, calculating a process for credit after the student completes the non-credit portion of the certificated programming, so that it then can transfer over into credit by the student's option, and then configuring in that process a stackable credential pathway that then leads them to multiple options, not only for career-focused short-term deliverables, but also towards the associate pathway and forward as we develop those criteria. So all of the chapter 4 and 5 board policies are really centered around creating that new model. So you'll see some of the policies are a little lengthy, and it was vetted and reviewed by our academic senate, and some of it might have been placed under academic procedure, but we left it in policy because it does not exist anywhere in the state. So with that in mind, if you have questions relative to the rationale behind direct assessment, no-term calendars, a financial aid calendar that would span over the course of 18 months, direct assessment entry being parallel to something like an independent study program where the student is starting at their own time and progressing at their own pace with all of the supports and processes in place that would facilitate their completion, you'll see in alignment with the policies that are set before you.
Just two other points I would add is that we saw that in the sort of what best practices around board policies, that it is typical that board policies often read as a policy to establish a policy. So the board is directing the president and CEO to establish a policy around X or Y or Z. So you'll see a lot of that language. The other thing is just a sense of urgency. As we read the statute that created the online college, we have standing before us a July 1 deadline to articulate a whole range of policies and procedures, among other things. And we see that as requiring board direction, board approval for being able to establish those administrative policies. So it's why we're sort of in a, kind of in a sprint to kind of get these before you all get the public comment, and then before July 1 really have that authority in place so that anything we develop administratively really proceeds from a direction from the Board of Trustees.
And I'd like to further clarify that for those of you that are probably wondering if this is all new to the state, of course, utilizing Title V and Ed Code processes and legislation in the design of the board policy, we also had to rely fully upon the Code of Federal Regulations. So with the students in mind who are our target population, who may need and could greatly benefit from Title IV federal funds, we also considered and followed in with great specificity the CFR code that sets forth certain standards for CBE, for direct assessment, for no-term calendars, and for federal financial aid.
Derek, I have a couple of questions. One is that we are obliged by law to adopt these policies before July 1. Is that correct, under the authorizing legislation?
Well, first, I should not say that I'm necessarily an expert, but my reading of it says that you are not obliged to actually do that, but we are obliged to have administrative policies in place, and so our interpretation of that is that the establishment of those administrative policies should flow from board-directed board policy.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, I did note that throughout this it says the CEO shall adopt policies to do X, Y, Z. Are you saying that that's typical in other college district policies? That's how they describe it?
It is often the case. It's often best practice. There are a few categories where boards of trustees have gone further than that. For instance, in non-discrimination, some other things that the boards have determined were of such great importance to the board that they wanted to articulate in the board policy greater specificity than simply direction to this president or CEO.
Okay. And then when the CEO has established these policies at this direction, do we see those policies, or are they vague? Are they described orally? How does that work?
My understanding is that the administrative policies don't necessarily require the approval of the Board of Trustees. However, it is often best practice that certain of those policies do come back to the Board of Trustees for their approval, especially around things as important as things like non-discrimination, academic policies, et cetera. So, and where statute may require it, then we would bring that back. Do you have a different?
I believe everything will come back to the board.
All of the administrative
Yes.
policies? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think Member Costa first.
Just to your point, the statute isn't specific about that, but I think it's implied because we have created a new district and you would need board policies to really administer the programs appropriately. My question is on 3280 and the grants portion. And I'm not really sure how it works in other community college districts, but I have a certain level of discomfort with us completely delegating all grants. Generally, I've seen processes, especially because we have a fiscal threshold in our other policies, where at the very least, we are given the discretion to delegate authority to execute a contract based upon successful completion of a grant application. And I think it's important that we have visibility into other funding sources, especially as we're looking at our budget. And so I would just ask through the president that this particular one be amended to say that go ahead and apply for the grants, but when it comes to actually executing the contract upon approval, that would come back to the board for approval.
Okay. Other board comment, I believe, Trustee Aguinaldo.
Thank you very much for putting these all forward. My question has to do with the set of board policies starting with 3400, specifically diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm hopeful that this set of policies around this topic isn't something that was cut and pasted, that there is a certain sense of uniqueness and authenticity to what we're putting forth here. Could you provide a little bit more detail as to the context for these policies and how we are infusing this with our Calbright plan?
Certainly. The answer to your question, short answer is yes, absolutely. We have set forth in the code that created the online college criteria that is very specific to our target population for students that are also going to not only be included based on the target population of the 18 or 25-year-old working adult single parent household, those students that have been underserved and underrepresented in the state of California who are not earning wages appropriately, that have been disenfranchised, that have not been able to achieve equity and realize those opportunities that have been beneficial to those who have been able to pursue higher education at a different level. It will also be inclusive of ADA criteria, students who are not able to benefit totally without the special needs and services as set forth in the ADA compliance Act that is set, those guidelines that are set forth in the federal criteria. It will also be consistent with HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution criteria that sets forth additional criteria. So there's a laundry list of additional services and criteria. There is a laundry list of other support systems and processes that are in place that go far beyond what we could put in this particular summary, but this is all inclusive and will be extremely comprehensive with great specificity and a great amount of detail about who we're serving, how we're serving, and how we're supporting them in the process.
Great, thank you very much.
Member Parago.
I understand where you're at with all of this, and board policies generally tend to be pretty vague in what they talk about, but it's administrative procedure where we see those more detailed explanations of sort of how the work is going to unfold. So I'm just curious what your plans are as these board policies are adopted to create those administrative procedures.
Well, that's a wonderful question because we are working on them as we're writing the board policy because it has to be very thoughtful. It has to be created and presented in such a way that it's manageable and that it is in total compliance with Ed Code that's set forth under our standards, but also the rest of Ed Code and Title V. So we're looking at all of those processes. We're looking at the OEI for guidance on our deliverables with the online courses. We're looking at the faculty. We just adopted the Academic Senate's, as a faculty, the resolution on guidelines for faculty at our last faculty meeting. We're setting forth those criteria as we're building the AP, and we're looking at additional criteria that is going to be absolutely essential to the deliverables in rolling out our programs. So we have a starting point. President Hiles will be presenting our pre-accreditation plan soon, and you'll see a flow chart that shows exactly where a student starts, how they go into the essential coursework, how they move forward to the core pathway, how they move into the apprenticeship and get assigned their mentors, their coaches, the faculty to student contact that's critical, the counseling and advising component, and then how they move from that into the mapping of PLA, the prior learning assessments, and the advanced standing coursework that might be able to yield results that lead to an associate's degree, and certainly direct them into the other 114 college campuses. So it's very robust and very detailed.
So I'm sorry, initially is the plan just to continue to work with Academic Senate and the administrative team to kind of get these up and running? Because they're generally shared governance type processes, and I know that you don't really have student trustees and all those people in place yet to have those fully vetted, but just kind of curious if that's still going to be the same procedure that you follow as you go forward.
We definitely are moving in that direction. I can't speak fully on, what happens outside of the faculty, because that's my relationship. But certainly as a faculty, we have adopted that resolution that the Academic Senate presented in October. It met all of our needs and criteria. We put it forth and voted on it fully at our last faculty meeting. And we had representatives from the state at that meeting. So yes, we're working collegially and collaboratively with the Senate.
Thank you very much.
I think member Trustee Aguinaldo, Trustee Aguinaldo, then Walker Griffin, and then Bob.
Just a quick question. I have a question in reference to 3710 and 3715. Could you discuss ownership and protection of intellectual property briefly?
I just haven't been able to get this to scroll for me, but Arceli, who's so much smarter than me on this stuff.
7610? 37.
3710.
What was your specific question in that regard? I'm sorry.
Could you provide a little bit of detail around the ownership of intellectual property? And I know that that's actually a hot topic with our sister colleges in the CSU and UC system, but for different reasons. So if you could just provide a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, as you can see, this is one of those policies that says the Board of Trustees will direct the CEO and president to develop policies around this. So I don't know that we have it completely fleshed out, but a big component of this will be that to the extent that we are building our own intellectual property, whether that's on the technology side, whether that's on the learning content side, that we have processes and protections for that intellectual property, and that there will be administrative policies governing all of that. Obviously, we want to also make sure that we're getting the input from the people who are helping to create that, whether they come from the faculty, whether they're coming from among our engineering team, other people who are working from within the team in a completely online college context. We will be building everything for delivery at scale, both on the technology side as well as on the learning content side. And so we think we'll probably have some unique IP and patent protection kind of work that we're going to have to do. But we don't have a lot of specifics at this moment.
That's right, and that is one of the cautions that I want to provide to you all, which is, remember, we are in the process of standing up this entire college, and we want to intentionally make sure that we leave enough room and space for innovation in an area that maybe hasn't in policies that maybe haven't had to address the kinds of innovation that we are going to be putting forth. And so we want to make sure that we don't limit ourselves so much so that we can't innovate in the ways that we need to proceed and to fulfill our objectives. I did want to also, just from an operational perspective, point out that we will probably need to engage with a legal firm that is in the business of a lot of IP type of law and is comfortable and familiar with all of the kinds of IP protections that are required. So I just want to give you that heads up from an operational perspective.
First off, I wanted to say I was pleased to hear that you were employing the resources made available by the League of California Community College League, because I thought that was before we were incorporated as a college, we didn't have access, and I trust that's been helpful. And I was also...
We're now a member, by the way.
Fantastic. So good, that should have a lot of benefits to the district going forward. The other was in the sticky area of codes of conduct too, and I wanted to relay an example that I had at my college. And I saw that we are beginning to define certain codes of conduct that would be appropriate, especially in this era of the digital space and how we balance the freedom of speech with various other issues too. But there was, for example, at my district, this goes back 15 years, but there was inappropriate relationship between a faculty and a student. We didn't have a policy that governed that, and so that we had to then quickly adopt one that could then become more enforceable. And I expect some of those HR type policies are going to be incorporated into this process.
Yeah, they will be, and I think there's going to, we often talk about how one of these things is not like the other, and we're the thing that's not like the other, and there will be two kind of governance processes. There will be all of the both board and administrative policies that sort of govern these kinds of things, and then there's what any online service provides, which is the terms of service, right? You go in before you can sign up for any app, before you can download any app, you have to agree to the terms of service, and we're going to have our own terms of service, which will, of course, reflect all the policies that we adopt here. But I think codes of conduct in a completely online environment can look somewhat different than how they look in a brick-and-mortar physical world institution. And we have to be mindful of those, and so really mindful that people are not abusing or misusing any of the online resources, making sure that there aren't any inappropriate ways in which people are interacting with each other. There's no harassment online. There's no discrimination or other sort of inappropriate kind of interaction online. But even then, to the extent that we intersect in the real world, how it is that we're governing those intersections through our policies. So those all have to be developed.
And I hope faculty are consulted in the terms of
service, yeah.
as well, because I also want to protect the faculty members' right to challenge their students, even if it's in an online context, to deal with new and provocative information.
We do have a section here called intellectual freedom, and so really trying to, in that section, also codify how important it is. Intellectual freedom is in both directions, how it is important for our faculty, but also important for our adult learners, and indeed for everybody who is associated with the college, that this is a central tenet of how we're going to operate.
Thank you.
Member Haynes.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciated the comments of my colleagues. A couple of things. One of them is the term used that I've seen in some of the policies. One is a flexible calendar, and then there's the term no term calendar, and so. And I apologize. I was trying to get through all of the reading of this, and so I did not mark where I saw one versus the other. And so to the extent that one term was used as flexible calendar was sort of a broad generalization, and obviously it was in one of the policies, but it was broadly used. The other one was much more specific relative to into our students being able to access curricula and learning in a no-term way where they could come in at any stage. But I would want to make certain that where flexible is used and used appropriately, that we have some definition of what that means someplace. That might be helpful, so as folks are reading that. And then we talked about sort of the writing of the procedures, which is the meat and potatoes, and the absolute underpinning of what we're trying to do and the timeline. And I want to make certain, because I don't actually remember, if there's a requirement of a July 1, in terms of public comment, is there am I correct that there's some time frame in which comment needs to come in? And does it need to come in order to meet that July 1, or is there flexibility and there is no timeline for that?
Well, just again, my understanding is that in order for us to establish certain required administrative procedures, which are have a July 1 deadline, we need board authority to establish those administrative procedures. So we assume that with this first reading published today, that over the next 30 days, we could get comments from, of course, all of you all, but the general public as well, and that we could then be in a constant process of iterating, looking at that input, and then making edits, adjustments, to the extent that votes need to be taken among our internal teams. We take those votes, and then we would provide for you back a final draft set of policies that you all could potentially consider and vote on at the June 27th Executive Committee meeting. So getting it passed just in the nick of time, and then would enable us to have those required administrative policies adopted in time for July 1.
So then what I would recommend is that to make certain that obviously folks who have questions or concerns or potential input to these processes can do it via email. They can do it all of those ways, but that we make certain that that particular meeting is noticed in a way that those who wish to show up can show up to provide input on it.
Sure.
That would be a recommendation by me. And then that's one, that's two. And then the third one, I just want to, along with other members of the board, indicate that having looked at a lot of policies and procedures, there were places where I could tell that there was intention relative to who we are trying to encourage to be a part in terms of students, and that the mission and the values were embedded within that document in a way that I have not seen. And it's extremely, from my perspective, we can't say enough about what that sort of means to the operating manual that we are creating, that's imbued within it. So I want to thank you for that. There are people who talked about me as the equity queen. I don't know. I don't know about the equity, the queen part, but so equity is really critical, and for these students, it's really, really important that we are digging very deep to encourage them, to nudge them into these kinds of courses and these times, and to really get what they need to get. So enough said, but you did a really good job in imbuing what our values are and what our mission is all about. Thank you.
Well, a lot of credit goes to Roz, and also to Lamar, who's sitting right there, Lamar Butts, who's our acting learner success chief, and they did a really remarkable job on this, and I find it remarkable that you found time over the weekend to read 45 pages of policy.
It wasn't over the weekend, it was last night and this morning.
Okay.
Trustee Perry.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, and something to think about as you go forward, I guess, and especially as you think about accrediting, maybe developing a calendar of when these will get re-reviewed so that you know on a consistent basis when they'll come up. I've been through many institutional, oh my God, moments where we were just pounding through these to get them done, and I think they deserve a much more thoughtful approach than that approach, which I think we've all probably who've worked in colleges have been a part of. So I would just offer that as maybe a recommendation to think about how often they'll come up and start developing a calendar of when your constituents would see them and be able to speak to them.
I know.
Let me control it. Trustee Perry.
Going back to the section on intellectual freedom, I think it's 4030 that you talked about. I thought it was very thoughtful, but I thought we might want to, since we're entering a very different realm, in a sense it's more virtual than physical, so we'll have different challenges than you were, i.e. a speaker coming to address a student body. I don't have any specific suggestions, but I thought maybe that section should look at reflecting this sort of new realm that we're going to exist in, that poses different and new challenges to intellectual freedom. So I just think a little more language addressing that I think would be great. Thanks.
Trustee Walker-Griffin.
Thank you, President Epstein, and thank you for the presentation. So my question sort of pertains to Section 4020. So I'll give you a little backstory. I personally haven't had an experience where I've had to take a class that had some I don't want to say fees that haven't necessarily been associated with the class, but some fees that were unexpected. And what do I mean by that? Access codes. And I understand that board policies tend to be a little vague, so that way teachers and who's ever trying to use them can manipulate them to the best of their advantage. But I wanted to know if there's going to be anything in terms of like the syllabus or the course description that will allow students to know about heads up fees that may come into play, such as access codes for different programs, or if there's fees when it comes to books that students may not necessarily know about, or just resources that they may not know about.
I think it's going to be a couple of things. First, President Hiles likes to say, we should be focused on, our mantra should be fast, focused, and free. So we're really figuring out how it is an adult learner can get through this competency-based education model very quickly. How it can be completely focused on the competencies that are required in order to attain employment in the area that they're looking for, and ideally free to the adult learner. And so that's something that we're thinking about a lot. Also within the context of how we will operate as an online college, the website is going to be really critical, as you might imagine. That's where people will be getting their first information, where they'll be getting their first support, where we'll be sort of guiding them through their first enrollment processes and getting engaged with their courseware. And it's through all of that that we have to be really, I think, rigorous about sort of exposing all of the information that an adult learner is going to need in order to make a really thoughtful, informed decision about whether or not to continue in a program. Did you want to, I know that we have certain requirements as well, so.
Yes, and to ensure that students are fully informed of every requirement in the program, using the direct assessment program model necessitates an enrollment agreement with the student when they start. So the faculty member will go through the entire program, the course syllabus, all of the criteria, all of the resources, all of the tools that are required, one-on-one with the faculty member of record, and set forth and outline a program and plan that will facilitate the student's ability to move successfully to completion. So persistence and retention are critical, and making